So I'm here with Professor Caraway, and he's going to tell us about his undergraduate experience when he was, back in the day.
Yeah, it was a long time ago. So the interesting thing about my financial concerns around my undergraduate experience was it was all kind of like my concerns stemmed from the worst financial decision I ever made, which was an argument with my father, actually. So when I was an undergraduate, I went to the University of Texas at Austin, and my whole reason for going to the university was so that I could get to Austin, Texas. And I didn't really care about the university side of it. I was a musician, and I was breaking into the music business.
Interesting.
Yeah, and that was the whole first 20 years of my life, basically. More than that, actually. I was in the music business probably until I was about 30 years old. And I went to the University of Texas because it meant that my parents would basically give me a weekly allowance so long as I was enrolled in courses. So it was...
So you're saying that's the worst decision you've made?
No, I'm getting there.
To that. Oh, okay.
That was a wise choice.
Because I was thinking, well, maybe it wasn't the worst, but
No, the worst decision. So basically, it was difficult for me to manage the life of a musician and a student.
Right.
So my grades were abysmal. I was a really, really poor student for the first 2 years of my undergraduate program. In fact, I've told many of the students, it took me 8.5 years to finish my undergraduate degree. Yeah, I was a horrible student.
You're like an artist, so yeah.
So yeah, I was stereotypical musician, just not paying attention to what I was doing at the university.
Oh, just a quick segue. Mm-hmm. What type of musician were you?
So I did a number of different things, but the main thing I did was electronic music in the 1990s, but I also played traditional Irish music. I had a number of different things.
Do you have any recordings anywhere out there that people can Google?
Oh no, I've cleansed the internet of all of that. But I'm happy to share it. Actually, it holds up.
We'll
I go back and listen
the
to
link
it
below for people who are interested.
Yeah, maybe I need to post it to YouTube somehow.
Yeah.
So
you went to university. The guys are going to university, but really as a musician.
Exactly. Okay. Wasn't doing so great in school. My parents knew that I wasn't doing so great. And then I met some guys and we were going to form a band. And I thought, the best way to become a pop star, rock and roll legend was to move in to a house with them and just play music all the time. My father did not like that idea. And he said, if you do that, I'm going to just cut you off financially, 100%. And in the course of this argument, I decided, okay, fine, I quit. And so I dropped out of the university and anticipated that they would just financially cut me off. So in the period of like 48 hours, I dropped out of the university and took a job washing dishes in a restaurant. And then like a week later, I had a conversation with my mother and she asked me how classes were going. And I was confused. Apparently my dad had just been bluffing and he wasn't really going to cut me off. It was just two stubborn guys like butting heads. And but I'd already made the decision and I'd already like dropped out of the university. So
you just left? You mean you didn't?
I left. Yeah, I left, and
but you didn't know that.
But I was already like on academic probation, so when I left, it pretty much the university closed the door behind me and locked it.
No.
And so this is why it took me 8.5 years to finish my undergraduate degree. That was the worst decision that I think I've ever made. So I was resigned to basically washing dishes at restaurants for a long time, years. But I eventually, moved up to waiting tables. I was a sous chef at a restaurant for a while. And then I actually started working real jobs within the music industry as an audio engineer and electronics guy. So I was doing quite well by the time I decided, by God, I'm going to get back in and finish my undergraduate degree. And it was the worst and best decision because I worked full-time all the way through after that argument with my father. worked full-time all the way through, and then when I became a graduate student, I also worked most of the time part-time, but occasionally full-time as well, as I completed both my master's and my PhD.
Well, you took a longer route, but in the process, I mean, you gained some like serious life experience and like work ethic, I would imagine, along the way, because you had to do it to survive, pretty much.
Yeah, so because I grew up in a family that was, my father was a doctor, he was a general surgeon. I grew up comfortably.
So you were rebelling, maybe?
Oh yeah, I was definitely rebelling. But the idea of having to go out and work full time definitely brought a level of maturity to me that I never had before. And I eventually did get into the music business, sort of through the door of being a live sound engineer and doing like repair work and things like that. And I was doing financially, I was well off for a musician. I wasn't starving artist or anything like that, and that was from my own labor. When I eventually decided to go back to grad school and do what I'm doing now and become a professor, that job experience of working in the music business, both as a performer and as a technical side, helped me get the job here at the University of Toronto, actually. My dissertation research was on the music industry and copyright law.
Oh, wow.
And then when I came here, I think part of the reason that I got hired here was because I was a scholar who was working on copyright and music, but I also knew how to produce things. So I have a background in 3D animation and modeling. I could do audio, obviously. I had some chops at video post-production.
You have the practical experience
as
well.
So I'm one of those unicorn academics that can actually both do the theory side and the practical side.
That's awesome.
So it was a horrible decision in one sense, that I found myself washing dishes for many years, but 10 years later, 15 years later, it actually all worked out for the best.
It paid off for you.
Yep.
So sometimes, but the thing is, I think the fact that you had to work and you developed the skills, and I don't even see it like a bad thing, because it's not like at the end of the day you amounted to nothing, kind of. You actually use those skills, and now it's working to your advantage, right?
Yeah, and it was always, it was a fallback position. I knew if school didn't work out, that I had a set of practical skills that would keep me employed and put food on the table. When I became an academic, when I decided to go to graduate school, I literally had to just cold turkey stop doing music and audio, and I left all of that just behind one day and put myself 100% into this career path. Recently, my wife is working on her MFA at OCAD University, and she's doing a virtual reality immersive experience sort of project, and she asked me to do the score for it. So in the last 2 months, I have all of a sudden become a musician again after like 10 years of not doing anything.
That's amazing, and I'm glad that you've said that, because Elly is all about expressing themes in finance in a creative way. And actually, the competition that we had in January, we had people doing music and dance and art, all with connecting the theme of some financial aspect that was relevant to them, and expressing it creatively.
Yeah, it's really important. My wife's project is actually on data visualization. Well, data visualization. She's visualizing science, ecological science. So that's their whole project, which I'm a part of, I guess, in some capacity as well. But the idea that there are certain things that we don't normally think of, like ecological science, you don't think of that necessarily as being congruent with like art or music or something like that. But there's obviously, an intersection there that can be very productive.
Yeah, because I said like Elly is kind of bridging that gap. You don't usually think of creativity and finance and music and dance when you think of finance, right? You tend to, it's dry and dull. But I think over the last couple of months, during this whole Elly project, we're seeing that, hey, we can connect the two.
Yep.
And I think it's true for any subject. I think when people just naturally gravitate towards these forms of expression. And so it's easy to connect it and understand the topic even more intimately when you're able to do so, right?
Yeah, I agree. And particularly things like, finance, and of course I teach some economics up here, and these are topics that a lot of times for communications students, you start talking about finance or economics and they're, the eyes just kind of
Glaze.
glaze over, and you're just like, oh no,
I
not
know that
this.
glaze so well.
But finance, economics more broadly, these things are so critically important to your lives in
They're
all
relatable.
arenas.
Yeah.
I mean, the relationship between economics and the arts is very direct. So these are really important areas that everybody needs to participate in. And the worst thing that can happen is to leave it up to a field of specialists who aren't necessarily that interested in engaging with a larger audience, or for the larger audience just to say, well, I'm going to leave it to the experts.
Right.
So I think it's really important for people to find ways to express really important topics in ways that are accessible, and that sometimes is something as simple as just being a good lecturer in the classroom, but sometimes
Which she is, by the way.
Thank you. I'll take the praise whenever it's thrown my way. But sometimes it's also trying to figure out ways to visualize it in, like what my wife is doing, through an immersive environment. Sometimes it's about making a poster that you're carrying to a protest at a World Trade Organization, something.
Yes.
Sometimes it's about writing a book for children. I mean, there's all of these different ways that you've got to get that information out to the public and not have it be some obscure, jargon-filled, intimidating thing, because
these are real topics that affect everyday life.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we have to find a way. That's awesome. So if you had to give students so we want to help students understand that, finance is not something they have to wait to think about. It's something that they should be thinking about now while they're in school or preparing for graduation. And if, given your wealth of experience, is there one tip you can give students that you think will really serve them well? Yeah,
actually, I would go back to my old man, the guy I was arguing with, who actually gave me some good advice, and I haven't necessarily been so great at practicing this advice. But one of the things that my father did, which was key for his success, was he became involved in investment early on. He was, he's still living. I think some people may have heard me talk about him. He's 90. What did he turn? Just 99 years old.
Wow.
Yeah, and he's doing quite well for himself.
Incredible.
99. But he's part of that post-World War II generation, became a physician. And despite the high earnings of a lot of specialists, my father practiced medicine in a small community, never charged a lot of money for his services, and in fact sometimes didn't charge at all. It would be sort of like means testing. If you weren't able to pay, he didn't ask you to pay. So he didn't make a tremendous amount of money from his profession, but he invested, and he did have the advantage of investing in the post-World War II boom. So it's hard to make a mistake when you start.
The magic of compounding.
Yeah, so you do pretty well if you could start from the 1950s and just keep going.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit of a different landscape now, but he started early. He started when he was I think for him, he probably started around the age 30 or so. And that served him and his family and me very well over the years. So my advice is to get engaged in that domain as early as possible.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us on the Elly interview, and hopefully in the future maybe we'll hear a score from you for Elly. Maybe.
Happy.
I'm just throwing it out there.
Happy to do that. If you like some bizarre electronic music, do a techno beat for you.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.